Today, we're starting in media res. I've never worked with 2-part epoxy resin before this project. I feel like I've jumped from watching Red Pavement to attempting the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. Fine, this isn't rocket science, but it's delicate work. I'm taking a 1-week shortcut on an ancient repair style that normally takes 2 to 3 months and have something functional and beautiful in the end. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have an idea. Alright, before I tell you about it, I'm going to mix this epoxy together so I can get it set up properly. It's going to take a few hours. While that sets, let me introduce you to kintsugi. Kintsugi translates to golden joinery and is an ancient Japanese art form for repairing broken ceramics using urushi lacquer and gold powder or foil. It glorifies repair, celebrates an object's history, and gives it a new lease on life. It's about cherishing what we have and not wasting it, embracing the imperfect and broken rather than throwing them away. You may be familiar with kintsugi as content creators smashing cheap ceramics to slap on epoxy and gold powder and stick them back together. This is not kintsugi, and while it mimics the aesthetics, its empty shell holds none of the philosophy. I don't believe I'm qualified to say much more about it, but I've got links in the description to experts that speak to the history and philosophy of the art form. This repair is very personal to me. This brewer was made by a friend, the wonderful Jane Gordon, and it has been my favorite drip coffee brewer to use at home. I fumbled with it on the drying rack early in the morning, it hit our stone countertop, and broke. This mug is part of a paired set my wife and I bought from the Santa Fe Opera House when we lived in New Mexico. I won't say who broke it, Pippa, or even allude to a perpetrator, Pippa, but suffice it to say, whoever did it is in the doghouse. Just to be clear, what I'm doing today isn't traditional kintsugi, but I don't have 3 months to sit while the lacquer cures. I need my coffee. I'm going to use epoxy resin, and that comes with some big problems. First, most epoxy isn't food safe. Art resin is one of the few, but it's only heat resistant up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, much too low for hot coffee. So instead, I picked Stone Countertop's Art Coat.
Quick update. Unfortunately, I was misdirected on my initial call with Stone Coat's support staff. I called again while editing and confirmed with their team that Art Coat is not FDA approved food safe. It is only USDA certified food safe and FDA compliant for incidental contact. Additionally, its heat deflection rating is only 130 degrees Fahrenheit, which is when it starts breaking down. I was told it should be safe for cold beverages, but would never hold hot coffee again. Caveat emptor, etc., but I'm still peeved. I cut a great joke here because of this misunderstanding. Boo!
Second, resin cures very quickly compared to lacquer, but it's also more temperamental. I made a couple of test pieces and did some experiments, and I'm really glad I did. Like my nose in the spring, resin is runny and difficult to work with, and no amount of Zyrtec helps. With all that out of the way, let's get started. My full written guide will be in the description down below with a list of all the materials and things that I used. First things first, mix your epoxy resin together. You should mix the gold powder in here, but I didn't do it because I thought I knew better.
I'm not a smart man.
It took my resin about 4 hours before it was thick enough to apply without running all over everything, but your resin might be different. Just be aware that a quicker curing epoxy will behave differently. Also, while you're working with epoxy, be sure to wear gloves and work in a well-ventilated space. Epoxy resin and hardener are quite toxic before they've cured, and you don't want it to get in or on you. You've only got one body, so take care of it. While that's curing, record your intro, just kidding, and sand and clean the edges of the broken ceramic. You don't need to sand it completely smooth, but the more you sand it, the more epoxy you will need to fill the gap and more of it will show. Use a respirator whenever you're sanding. Tiny shards of ceramic in your lungs are not good. After you sand, dry fit everything together and figure out the best way to assemble your piece. It's critical to have the correct order of operations or you will run into problems when applying the epoxy. Once the resin is nice and thick, apply it to the pieces and put them together following your dry fit from earlier. On a side note, look at how beautiful this looks. It's like liquid glass on the end of a little wooden spool. Anyways, it's just very nice. You want it to be quite thick so that it takes some effort to press the pieces into place. If there is a chance the piece will droop or fall apart, use painter's tape to hold it in place while the epoxy cures. You can also use painter's tape on either side of gaps to give the epoxy something to bond to. If you don't, the epoxy will slide down the sides of your piece and leave a hole. Allow your piece to cure to the point where you can handle it and it's no longer sticky. For Art Coat, this was between 12 and 24 hours after I first mixed it. It's not fully cured at this point and should be pliant enough to cut and pry off easily with a crafting tool. If you need to apply a final coat like me, mix together epoxy and gold powder. Use a needle-thin paintbrush to apply a sliver of gold-mixed epoxy along the cracks. If you don't have a thin brush, you can just cut the hair from a normal brush to your liking. Dust on some additional gold powder and lightly brush it on the curing epoxy with a broad brush. Keep an eye on it while it cures, dusting again as needed and rotating the piece to avoid drips and dribbles. So here's a question, which do I prefer?
It's certainly flatter. Oops, I shouldn't rub it. And this is finally looking good, I think, with the second round of applications. I'm quite happy with that guy up there, and we'll let this guy cure now. And I'll stop touching it. I'm gonna stop touching it. Oh, that looks nice.
Let it cure for 12 to 24 hours until it's no longer sticky. The last step is cleanup. Lots of cleanup if you're me.
It's like everywhere I look, I feel like there's just more things that I want to remove.
My fine motor skills are questionable at the best of times, and there was a lot of experimentation and learning done here. A crafting knife with a chisel attachment will be your best friend. And you're done. Just let it fully cure and you'll be ready to go. Together, broken, deferring the sun's setting, gold binds together. Castigate the dog, rebuild with a wounded heart, welcome evening fog. Bad at poetry, repair surpasses haiku, but only barely. Sorry about that, I couldn't help but indulge. Please forgive me. Please forgive mother. But seriously, I'm actually rather happy how this turned out. It's not perfect, and it looks like a first attempt, but it's my first attempt. If I'm given future opportunities to practice this art, Pippa, I will jump eagerly into it. The whole process felt restorative, an opportunity to relax and not worry too much. Anyway, that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed this kintsugi-style repair, and it gives you the confidence to try it yourself. Tell me in the comments if you think you can do better. I don't want to jinx anything, but I would love to try the traditional method in the future. If you made it this far into the video, I urge you to click like and subscribe, and reach out to someone you've cherished but are now estranged from through some disagreement. Appreciate the past and try to mend what's been broken. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
We're all about learning as we go on this channel.